welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you are all doing well, you beautiful badasses. All right, let's get right into it. This is an article. I kind of knew this stuff was going to happen, and it ties into a later video I'm going to do, but let's get right into it here. This one is coming to us from the good people at Gamer Rant. Okay, and this is how Rings of Power changed audience perceptions of the evil races. The lines between good and bad have begun to blur for Tolkien's beings, and it makes for a more compelling story. Okay, all right. The recent Rings of Power series has gone a long way towards rectifying one of the biggest criticisms of both Tolkien's works and Peter Jackson's subsequent movie trilogy adaptations. That criticism is its presentation of the, quote, evil races. In the original stories of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, there is a clear and definite distinction between the good races in the world, including the elves and the hobbits, and the bad races in the world, like the orcs and the goblins. However, it is problematic enough to suggest that any race is completely homogeneous and that there is no diversity in consciousness or morality among them. And it's even more problematic to suggest that that entire race is inherently cruel and malicious. The Amazon show addressed this in a striking and unique way that has audiences questioning their perception of some of Tolkien's more beastly species. For the narrative of Tolkien's tales to work, the binary opposition between the courageous heroes and the self-serving villains has to be clear enough to justify the wars and battles that are fought. The heroes pick up their swords in defense of the world they love in order to protect it against the domination of an evil tyrant. By contrast, the villains take pleasure in the torture and corruption. There are very few gray areas in between, but Rings of Power flipped this on its head with the perspectives of two different races. First, it explores the elven occupation of the Southlands. Secondly, it introduces the character of Adar, who represents a very different kind of orc from the snarling brutes in the Jackson films. Tolkien has always suggested that some of the different races in Middle-earth are more easily misled than others. Men, especially, are easily corrupted and lured by temptations of power like the One Ring. But one race that has always seemed fairly infallible is the Elves, the golden children of Iluvatar, who had the very world laid at their feet. All the elves in Lord of the Rings were good guys, helping the Fellowship to achieve their impossible mission. It seemed as if the race could do no wrong. This was challenged slightly by the character of Thranduil in The Hobbit, who was definitely more unfeeling and proud than any who came before him. Sorry, I always trip up on Thranduil. Rings of Power represented for the first time elves who were seen as pompous, self-righteous, and even unfairly oppressive towards the Southlanders. This began to challenge the idea of whether entire races could truly be good or evil. In fact, the High King Gil-galad shares the characteristics that made Thranduil so hated in the films. He, too, has the arrogance and superiority that began to crack the seemingly golden idea of elves as a race of beings. From the third episode of the series, it became very clear that the orcs were also different from their rendition in the 2000s movies. There were changes in everything from the way they looked and moved to their treatment of the elves. They still showed no compassion shown towards the slaves they had tasked with digging the channel to Mount Doom. However, there was definitely a greater sense of community among the orcs themselves. Unlike the two separate tribes of orcs in The Lord of the Rings, who seemed contented to bludgeon each other to death and possibly eat the remains, they showed love and respect towards their dead, a trait especially shown by Adar, whom the orcs call father. Adar's vow to Galadriel that he would build the orcs a home where they could finally belong and be safe was a very new and interesting take on the previously bloodthirsty image of the race. It also contributed towards making Galadriel's potential genocide of the orcs so much more problematic. In this scene between the Uruk and the she-elf, Adar told her of the cruel suffering that the orcs, his children, had endured under the torture of Sauron. It's an emotive and empathic backstory that furthers their plight and gives reasonable motive behind their questionable actions. The history behind the Moriandor began to reframe them as feeling people rather than thuggish aggressors. It's not that the races have switched roles. The elves haven't become sadistic and the orcs haven't become saints. However, there has definitely been a shift towards understanding that there is variation in every race, and indeed within every individual. Neither all orcs nor all elves can be tarred with the same brush. How this new moral complexity will develop remains to be seen, but will surely be a key focal point for the second series of the show, or second season of the show, I guess they mean. Audiences have to see whether Adar and Sauron will join forces or fight for rule of Middle-earth, and how this will change the ever-growing dynamics of the world. All right. So, I mean, let's talk about it. Yes, the Rings of Power did, in fact, did make those changes. Okay. However, it illustrates a point that I've been making. If you guys have been subscribed to the channel, you know, over several videos where I've talked about Rings of Power, and how it's presented, and how people have reacted to it. This article holds true only if you don't have any point of reference beyond Peter Jackson's films. And what I mean by that is this article is true only if you don't know Tolkien and don't know Lord of the Rings, okay? And don't know the Legendarium as Tolkien wrote it, okay? Because as you know, right out of the gate, the elves are not portrayed as being the perfect beings that this article says that they are, based on the author only referencing Peter Jackson's films. Okay, the elves, if you know, I mean, going right back to the first kinslaying, okay, and the Oath of Feanor, okay, and you know, their desire to hoard the Silmarils. The elves were never perfect. The elves were never above reproach, let's say. Okay, they made mistakes and they fell into the same traps of greed and lust and arrogance as anybody else. And this is shown throughout. Okay, you know, with the Sons of Feanor, you have it. You know, Thranduil. And others, you know, you see this sense of arrogance and superiority. I mean, going back to Beren and Luthien, okay, the fact that Beren even steps into Doriath, into their land, okay, is grounds for death. Okay, is punishable by death. Okay, that's how high and mighty the elves there thought of themselves, or at least the king, Thingol, thought of himself, right? So just being there was enough to warrant the death penalty for Beren, okay? So if you're familiar with Tolkien's work, you know that this whole idea of the elves being these perfect beings is not true. You know, throughout the Legendarium, there are multiple different stories and different elven characters that are less than likable. Let's just put it that way, right? So that takes care of that side. And now, in terms of the orcs, you know, it's stated from the beginning that it's implied that the orcs are a corruption of the elves. Okay, they are Melkor / Morgoth, essentially kidnapping and torturing and corrupting elves. Okay, so you know, they are not depicted wholly as just evil beings for the sake of being evil beings. Okay, they are the tortured, corrupted remains of what once was elves. Okay, and you know, you can dive deeper into it. Why does Melkor do that? Well, because they're the children of Iluvatar, and he hates any creation that's not his. So you know, he morphs them into these tortured forms, these corrupted forms of what Iluvatar created, i.e. the elves, and they become the orcs. Okay, and then so you know already the backstory, and that, like, as a species, the orcs are not just these evil beings that are evil for the sake of being evil, that there's more to the story. Unless your only introduction to orcs and elves is either through the Rings of Power in relation to the Peter Jackson films. And this is sort of where the problem sort of arises, is that you're seeing articles like this where they say how the Rings of Power did this great thing by showing that the elves aren't all perfect and the orcs aren't all evil. But if you know Tolkien's work, you know that he repeatedly goes back to this. As a matter of fact, Tolkien actually said in his famous letter that's at the forward to the Silmarillion, he specifically says that the story of the Silmarillion is the story of the elves' fall. Okay, he lays it out. I mean, I could go back there. I'm sure you guys don't want to see me run back there and pull the book off the shelf and turn to the page. But literally, Tolkien says that the Silmarillion is about the elves' fall from grace. Okay, so when you see articles like this, it's coming from somebody who has a very, and I hate to say this because it sounds sort of arrogant, like I'm trying to prop myself up, but it sounds like somebody who's got a very surface level understanding of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, and probably their experience with it isn't having read the books and doing the deep dives into the lore and all the nature of Middle Earth, the peoples of Middle Earth, the histories and stuff like that. But their thing is like, okay, I've seen Peter Jackson movies. And I know that they're based on a book. And now I've seen the TV series, and it's different from the Peter Jackson movies. So therefore, the TV series is sort of updating this concept of perfect elves versus, perfectly evil orcs. Okay, because that's what I'm familiar with from the Peter Jackson films. And it's like, no, if you read the books, if you understood Tolkien's Legendarium, you understand that was never the case. The orcs were never purely evil or wholly evil. Okay, and the elves were never perfect. Ever perfect. Never. Okay? I mean, they even have the gods put a curse on them. Okay? The doom of Mandos. Okay? That they were never perfect. Okay? They were not above being arrogant and haughty and selfish and prideful and lustful and all that stuff. So, I mean, I see articles like this, and it's just like, man, if you just take the time out and spend some time, like, really getting into these books, you'd see that an article like this really is only if you limit your experience of Tolkien to the Peter Jackson movies versus the Amazon show. That's the only way that an article like this kind of holds any weight. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Do you think that, when you see articles like this, is it indicative of somebody who just has a surface level understanding of Tolkien? Or do you think there's more to it? Maybe I'm just, too quick to point out where things are wrong when it comes to articles about Tolkien, that maybe I'm missing it. Maybe this person does have a valid point that I'm overlooking. Let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, if you like the video, give the video a like. If you feel like sharing it, please feel free to do so. If you have not done so already, I would take it as a personal honor and wear it as a badge of pride if you would kindly consider subscribing to the channel. It helps get the word out. It helps the channel do well, and the whole algorithm thing helps me build the thing up, and, we'll see where it goes. If you already have subscribed, thank you very much. I am honored, and I will continue to do my best to bring you content that you like to. If nothing else, we can complain about shit together. I think that's cool. Anyway, I will talk to you guys on the next one. Until then, be good, be safe, and be awesome. I will see you later.